Hi there everyone, hope you're all well. Just going to do a follow-up on a different topic. I like to talk about globalization with trade within the 2030s onwards. It is very important to identify how we can grow and develop as a nation, as a global culture, about globalization and how we can make money, promote prosperity with our trading partners and within the workers as well. Now, globalization is like pros and cons against it. Naturally, of course, there will be. There's a huge fear mongering of globalization versus nationalisation. As we all know, Britain is an island. There's no denying it. It's an island and it's wet all around us. Massive ocean and all that stuff. But Britain has always been in the centre of trade, noticeably global trade. Global trade is not new, it's been around since ancient times with the old Silk Roads. We all know this because of the spice from India and things like that crossing over into Turkey and then trading with the rest of Europe, which is great. Globalization does have positives and negatives, depending how you look at things. So with globalization, the positives is trading, keeping costs low, communication, especially now with technology such as mobile phones and talking to your computer screens, that sort of thing. Communication is key, especially for businesses, and you exchange ideas, ideas of growth and development, culturally and so forth. It does bring that wonder. However, it also has a downside, and that is globalization can cause spreading of ideologies which you don't want. It brings in like seedy trades such as trafficking, narcotics, slavery and all that stuff. It does have it if it's not controlled and legislated in a massive way. So there are pros and cons, and it also brings in and exploits people. It exploits people from other countries on lower incomes and lower developed nations. So there are pros and cons. Britain has always been a global nation. Its ports are very important, but the thing is, if you cut a country off, no country can be self-sustaining. China cannot be self-sustaining. The Americas cannot be self-sustaining. Britain certainly can't, and we know this from the Second World War with the U-boat attacks. Even recent years of like the Suez Crisis of the 1950s, when that was renationalised by an Egyptian of Asaf, I can't remember his name, with the Suez Crisis, and even that the Evergreen boat, when it got jammed and stuck in the Suez Canal, and that caused a lot of damage and like delay for world trade because ships had to be diverted across the Cape of around the Cape, across South Africa and go upwards, and that takes months. That's extra few months, and it causes more pollution. That's another con, is like pollution levels that keep going up because of globalization. However, no country can be self-sustaining. Even Britain with its food, for example, we cannot grow food all year round constantly. It's an impossibility because of the seasons, naturally, of course it is. Even if we develop things like vertical farming and hydroponics, we can still not feed our population fully. It'd be a massive improvement, don't get me wrong. It will be a massive improvement and boost. It definitely will be. But there's more to it than just that. It's also with trades with other nations, and we do this by cars and things like that. Cars, luxury goods, boats, jewellery, you name it. all like crisscrossing across the world, and it's great. It really is. It produces a lot of money. Not a lot of people know this, but Britain also is the 5th largest producer in the world. And probably by the time this video goes live, it'll probably be 5th or 6th, but it's still be in the top 10, which is great. Also, you need to control legislation, trade routes, because if you have a complete free-for-all of free trade, free goods and all that stuff, personally, you just have like a Wild West situation, which is ridiculous. It really would be ridiculous, because you'd be trading anything, including people, narcotics, weapons without a license and so forth, so the wrong people will get their hands on it. If you legislate it too much and make everything state-owned, there's too much bureaucracy, there's no growth, there's no development. Again, no good for anyone. Socialists and, of course, nationalists do not like globalization, and there's a reason for that. With the far-right lot, it brings in people from other countries, from poorer countries, coming here to exploit with things like immigration to get free housing benefits, luxury lifestyles in hotels, which our government is too weak and powerless to even control. Socialists do not like globalization because it's a good way of making money, it's profiteering, and it's exploiting British workers, actually both sides, so that British workers will be worse off because you're getting people from abroad coming in, doing things even cheaper, but do things really well. Britain's always been a country which basically is diverse. It always has been. We all know that people from literally anywhere in the world comes into our country for trading, and naturally so. When I was at school, we were told, or we were educated, this is like during the Blair years, to hate the British Empire, to absolutely be ashamed of it. We were disgusted by it. Even though it brought in a lot of good as well as bad, I grant you it wasn't perfect. Yes, there's no denying that. Indian Mutiny is a good example. The Chinese opium crisis, opium war, is another good example. We know that there are some bad sides, but there are some good sides to it, such as it opens the door for understanding cultures, to trade with other people. Without the creation of like the British Empire, Thomas Cook, the travel agents, they wouldn't exist. Now that's something to actually think about, because it allowed people to travel, to go abroad, to see wonderful places. Not many people before the British Empire would have ventured off to like Egypt or the Americas or any of these luxury, gorgeous places like Thailand, for example. Since the creation of the British Empire, people started to travel. Actually, so as people, we do travel. And by doing so, we create trade, diplomacy, and so forth, and we do it really, really well. Britain now, in the 21st century, needs to think how to keep its trade going. It needs to develop its seaports, because they are so lacking of improvements, especially with goods coming into the country. It's grown exponentially thanks to the creation of the container. It really has. It needs to improve on its cybersecurity, because the way we trade online has grown hugely. And again, we're lacking on that. Even customs and excise, especially customs, that seems to have a back burner, and that actually has a very good way of prevention of fake goods coming into the country. And again, fake goods can cause a lot of damage to not only British economy, the world economy, and also the workers from faraway countries who are being exploited by criminal gangs. So again, if you improve your customs and excise, you can actually damage the criminals, rightly so, and help boost your own economy, because it does cause billions of pounds worth of damage to our local economy. It certainly does. If you improve the seaports around the UK, such as like Newcastle for the Scandinavian countries, Dover needs restructuring with like trade with the rest of continental Europe. It needs it because it is struggling to maintain with the amount of freights and goods and people crossing the English Channel, rightly so. And it is struggling, it needs investment. And there's so many other places. Southampton's a good example. Liverpool's a good example. They need more development because it creates jobs, it creates business, it makes more money into local economies, which is what we need. And it's vitally important we even protect our trade routes, because I think in the past 30 years, Britain has been a massive decline on development of protecting our borders and trade routes, especially from countries such as Russia attacking the underwater cables, and even from certain Middle Eastern countries and Somali pirates attacking cargo ships crossing into Europe for trading with the rest of the European countries. And it's not just Britain that's struggling with this. Germany's struggling, France is struggling, most of Europe is struggling, and we need to work together, we need to work and collaborate. I still think personally the good time when Britain worked well and promoted goods and things like that is when Britain joined the EEC. This is before the EU, when the biggest threat was the Americas and their cheap goods coming into America, coming from America into the UK, taking money away from British goods and things, and British industry was on a decline because the Americas was getting bigger and bigger and better, and the rest of Europe was crumbling. Everything had to be American only, and the EEC was meant to prevent that, and boosting growth, development, and minerals, protection of minerals such as oil, gas, metals within Europe. And it worked. It really did work until when John Major came into power. Then it went a bit skew-iffy because it became political. The EU came about, and then it created things like Nigel Farage and UKIP, and later on becomes UK Reform. A lot of socialists do not like the idea of a free economy. They do not like it because of protection of British workers. I get that. However, if you legislate everything, there will be no growth and development. But for them, they do not care because they believe in the rights of the trade unions rather than the rights of the average British worker, which is more damaging. Here's another shocker which I find is surprising is, did you know there are no British owned ferry companies, or very little shipping lines are British owned? Britain at one point had the highest amount of employment within the maritime industry. It was vast, not just with our Royal Navy, but with our Merchant Navy too. We produce a good 3/4 of the entire Merchant Navy fleet of the world. Now it's barely a sixth. It's hardly noticeable, and it's really pathetic for an island nation to be in that situation. It's really bad because we want to create jobs. We want to promote Britain's industry as a business. I mean, London's a good example of how amazing how global trade does work. And a lot of money does go into London. Even fashion, if you're into fashion and things like that, that has a massive impact within globalization. Globalization is part of fashion as well because it spreads across the world and you spread your wonderful ideas. Same as Paris, Milan, Madrid, and things like that. So fashion and globalization do come hand in hand. Same with car manufacturing, same with steel materials and all that stuff. So we need to promote again what Britain can do to manufacture. We need to improve security of our trade routes, and we need to increase efficiency on globalization of infrastructure across the country and across the world, and how to do it, how to make seaports more efficient, how to make railways more efficient with freight. A lot of people do forget about freight in a massive way, and freight is very important because it keeps the world turning. Don't forget Lloyd's Bank or Lloyd's Shipping Insurance, that all originated from a coffee shop in London, and without global trade we wouldn't have these banks that we have today. Granted, banks are questionable, they do have their faults, and we know this from the 2008 financial crisis. However, when it comes to global trade and promoting jobs and all that stuff, you need to have a more improved industry with globalization and trade. Also, you can restrict certain countries if they're not very good at humanitarian aid and atrocities. You can cut them off. And here's the thing I found struggling with regards to trade is, how come India and China, despite of the Russian war with Ukraine, India is still buying gas and oil from Russia? Why? That's what I want to know, is why are they still doing that and yet still getting humanitarian aid from the rest of the European countries? That's kind of like a two-faced ideology. It doesn't make sense. So globalization, is it good? Is it bad? You decide. And I hope this video can help. Take care. Bye.